You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Good morning, Justin. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well.
Good.
I had a great day yesterday.
Oh, tell me about it.
So I know I've mentioned these trips before on here, but I went on one of these offshore birding trips.
Yeah.
And it was just like not a cloud in the sky. It was just a beautiful day. And just, I don't know, something about being on the water, being around people who are like excited to see the same things.
Yeah.
Just really fills the soul,
Yeah.
I guess. Like it was a real, just peaceful and like away from everything kind of feeling. Like you're literally like, how can you be more out of disconnected? Like,
right.
You're 30 miles from the coast on a boat. You have no cell service. Like no one can get a hold of you. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
You're just there. And it was really good. Really, really enjoyable.
How do you, because, so often with caregivers, it's like, I feel like people are like, oh, I have a little bit of free time. Therefore, I'm going to do the things on my to-do list,
Right.
And it's like, we are not good at doing things for ourselves. And you are a model for us of doing things like planning these day trips and saying like, I'm going to, first of all, to like take the time, but then also like to be out of cell service, right? Like that's a big deal. And so how have you convinced yourself, or maybe it wasn't hard to convince yourself, like how do you help yourself do that so that the rest of us can learn? Because many of us are not good at this.
Right. I mean, to be honest, a not insignificant piece of it is the fact that Sarah lately has been doing better. But that's not to say, I think 2 years ago, was the first time I did something like this. And she was not as good at doing as well as she is now. So, I mean, I think there is you have to do it a couple times and see that things can be okay. And that's kind of a muscle to build.
Sure.
And I don't know, for me, just it's an important thing to have something on the calendar to look forward to.
Yeah, for sure.
I get stuck in these feelings like things are always just going to be how they are. And you're just, nothing great is going to happen anymore. And I mean, a not insignificant piece of that is the depression that I've been going through.
Sure.
And so like to have these things on the calendar that I know are going to be such a like fulfilling, wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And to be looking forward to those, like it gives you something to like, you're moving towards this thing.
Yeah.
That you can like, I don't know. It's like Christmas kind of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think having it on the calendar too, it's not just like when we plan those things and it's like you and Sarah and everybody knows like, okay, on this weekend, he's going to be doing his thing. And so it's not even as much as like, if we wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I have a free day.
Right.
Then I think sometimes our brains can be like, well, right. But if you have got it scheduled, then everybody's sort of on board. And so that's awesome. I think that we can all learn from that. And obviously we don't all live in gorgeous, like, on the ocean places like you.
Right.
But, there's versions of that. Like, how can we all find versions of that we can do to get away and recharge in that way? So that's awesome. And I love it because I feel like so often when I say, hey, how are you? And you're like, well, right. And so for you to be like, I feel great. It's like, oh, it's beautiful.
I was talking to Sarah after I was hitting the road driving back, and I was telling her about the day, and she was saying, I haven't heard you this excited about something in a long time.
Wow.
Which was a really great thing to think about. Like, this is a good moment, and I needed that.
Yes, I am really, really happy for you. And again, I want to give you kudos because you're the one that made that happen.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it wasn't easy to say, like, you're in the pattern now, so maybe it is a little easier, but like to plan something for yourself. And so that's awesome. Keep doing it. Keep planning those things. That's amazing.
All right.
Yeah. Cool.
What about you? How are you doing? How are things over there?
Well, we are in like spring heaven here in Minnesota. And so I'm just like loving that, having, being outside and digging in the dirt. And it's just like, that's my happy place. So
nice.
Loving that. I've been thinking a lot about how a year ago, so it's May now, but a year ago in April was when I was at that low point. And how much different I feel this year at this time.
Right.
Like I actually even did like Zumba the other day.
Oh, wow.
Twice in 1 week, and I didn't fall over. And I was like, look at me. Look at me doing this Zumba. And I just thought about how last April, like I literally was like so exhausted in every possible way that I was like at a place where I was like, I couldn't go around the block. Like I was so exhausted.
Right.
And for all the reasons, right? Yeah. And I remember saying to a friend of mine at one point during that time, saying, I just know now that I will always be either this tired or more tired. And she was like, that's not true. And I was like, what? What? Because I just kept thinking, okay, life is hard. It's only going to get harder.
Yeah.
Like this is my new baseline, this or worse. And she was like, that's not actually accurate. And now I am, if I could have seen like, okay, a year from now, you're going to be doing Zumba and gardening and whatever, like,
right.
I would have been like, no way.
Right.
So anyway, I just think that was an extreme case of exhaustion. Right. And I think, but as caregivers, we have a lot of reasons to be exhausted on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking that today we could talk about all the ways in which, and all the reasons why, like, I think that, everybody in the world is talking about like, oh, the world is hard and it's hard to be a 40 something and it's hard to be a whatever. And we're all tired. Yes. And we have that plus
right.
a whole bunch of layers. And so I was hoping that today we could talk about like, what are the things that make us caregivers especially exhausted? Not to depress our friends, but to sort of name it to tame it, to be like, there are reasons that you are extra tired, my friends. And then hopefully maybe get into a couple of things that we can do to sort of help so that it's
right
to alleviate it a little bit or to get supporters in or anything like that. So when you hear me say that about the exhaustion, like, I think I know the answer, but does that ring true with you, my friend?
Oh, certainly. I have had seasons of being extremely exhausted as a caregiver. I know that I am in a season now where that's much less the case, which I'm grateful for. But thinking back to like, especially when Sarah was bedbound for like 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I was running on fumes.
Yeah.
There, you have, just everything, all the tasks to keep a household going.
Yeah.
And normally those are split between two people, or ideally they're split between two people. And suddenly, like, that's all on you.
Yeah.
So that's a piece.
Yeah. I think because you're about to go into another one, and I just want to sit on that for one more second, because that's a really big one for all of, I think we have a lot of spousal caregivers listening.
Right.
And I know that I feel that a lot, like I'm saying, I'm doing all this yard work and I like love it. But also sometimes I'm like, I sure do wish that, and Sean, like just last night was like, I could try to rake. And I was like, no,
right.
No. And I was like, it's not like you're like deadbeat husband who's just sitting here like, I'm not going to help. But I was like, you can't not do this raking. You cannot.
Right.
And so that feels really hard, because it's not just like, oh, we need to talk more about division of labor, right? Typically, our people really want to be doing more.
Yeah.
And it's really hard and sad for them. They can't. And so it's not like we can it's like having a conversation about it. They cannot. And so, but that's a huge thing, that just like the household tasks, first of all, are bigger when you're a caregiver, right? Because a typical couple would not be doing things like ordering medical supplies and setting up feeding tubes and yada, yada. So there's more.
Yeah.
But then also just the generic stuff of the yard work and the laundry and the yada, yada is all like just on us.
Right. And some of that you may have to learn how to do. So like, I wasn't the one that was always doing the laundry before Sarah got sick. And not that laundry is this difficult thing, but like there's things to know to not like really screw things.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And like, I don't know, it's just getting into the rhythm of like new things that you didn't have to do before, and like having those to do that learning, or like yard work could be one. If your person was the person that took care of the yard.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole lot of knowledge around that, and also if all you can do is mow the lawn and other stuff kind of goes to the wayside, that's probably fine too. But there's more tasks. It's the tasks that maybe you're not as good at too.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that you have to like learn how to do like clean, but maybe you're not as good at cleaning or lawn or whatever it is. And so on top of everything else, you're having to do these things that you're not as good at, or you just wish that the load didn't all fall on you.
Right. Like, I thought that you left me a message the other day about how you had gone on a trip last weekend, and then you're like, and now I'm back and having to do all the things that I typically do for the household, that I didn't do because I was gone for the weekend.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like, oh, you were gone, so Sarah was able to do it. Right. Like, that's not the way it goes at your house or my house. Right. So you had this fun weekend, and that didn't mean that the laundry fairy came. Right. That just meant that you had to do the laundry when you got back. Right.
Like, that's what my day today is going to look like, is catching up on what I would have done yesterday, but because I was gone.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think an interesting thing, like, I've been thinking a lot about this with the yard work, is it's like, part of me wants to like reach out and ask for help. But then I'm kind of like, we're not in like a hard season, and I don't want to necessarily want to take us down this whole path, but like, it feels like, am I allowed to ask for help?
Right.
But it also was like, well, but typically in my house, like, there would be 2 of us adults doing this, and there aren't. So I do want to ask for help, but also I feel like, you know what I mean? So that's an extra piece that I think people don't maybe realize, is that we're doing all the housework.
Right.
Plus all the medical stuff. So reason number 1 and 2 of 10,000 why we're tired.
Yeah.
What are other reasons when you think about like exhaustion, and like what leads to caregiver exhaustion in your life or in general? Like, what do you think of?
Another area from when Sarah was really sick was just sleeping was not as restful as an experience.
Sure.
Her sleep schedule was totally off.
Yeah.
So she was awake a lot of the night. She, her restless legs were really bad.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it was like really difficult to sleep in the bed next to her for me to get restful sleep. So there were times, I slept in another room just so I could get sleep. But also, she's awake, and so she might need something in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
She might need help walking to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And so we had this like call button.
Yeah.
Or if I was in the room, then she would wake me up. But it's like you're kind of half asleep, like waiting for something. And you're up in the middle of the night, and it's just you're not getting the daily rebuilding thing that sleep is supposed to provide. And that has like a compounding effect over time that can really lead you feeling exhausted.
Yeah. There's a thing it's something about like, because this is true, I think, with parents of young children too, is like, and I felt like this when Maya was little and she didn't sleep for her first year here. And it was like when she would yell, "Mama," in the middle of the night, I would feel like I was already awake. And I'm like, how do I feel like that? But it's because you don't go down into that deeper sleep. You're just sort of in this like, what would you say? Sort of peripheral, or, like,
it's
sort
like
of
you
like,
have one ear open, and it's like, you're kind of like asleep, but you have some alert system still on that is just like waiting for that call.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how I felt. Is I was always like half ready, just ready to jump out of the bed at any moment. And so then you're not getting that deep, restful sleep. And I think that that's true for us as caregivers, is that, we're often like sort of attuned to sounds that they might be making, or are they okay? Are they this? Are they that? Are they, was that do they feel hot? Like all of those things that we're just attuned to. I mean, on an extreme level, is I have a good friend whose partner is in their final stages of life. And he has been saying that like he wakes up and like checks to see if she is breathing. Right. I mean, like, how do you sleep in that situation? Yeah. And so like we're not getting this sleep because we're on, even in our quote sleep time.
Yeah.
We're still on. Right. And I think about like, you have a dog that is sometimes high maintenance in the middle of the night. And I have 3 animals and a child who are sometimes high maintenance in the night. Right. And so I would guess like we are then the go-tos when the other creatures in the household need something in the middle of the night. Right. It's not one of these like, oh, I got them last night, you get them tonight. Right. It's like, oh, no, that's us.
Yeah.
So then we're doing that extra piece as well. And I think about like for sleeping, that because our to-do lists are longer than most, then that probably means we're like, there's fewer hours in the day for us anyway. And then sometimes like the only time that we are able to sleep or to do something for ourselves is either like late at night or early morning.
Right.
If we want to build in any of that like self-care time, right? Then like it's those times, and then your night is getting shorter and shorter by the minute, right? I think then the other layer for sleep is hospital stays, right? And you haven't had to do as many of these, fortunately. Right. But I have spent many a night like in a chair in the hospital room or in the ER, you know, and then like even if you do get a cot or whatever, like the nurses are coming in like every hour, and then you're like, well, up and down and up and down. And then should I get up? Like, should I not? Do they get it? Should I, you know? Or if your person's in the hospital and you come home to sleep, it's not like you're really sleeping well because your person's not there and you're waiting for a phone call.
Yeah.
Or if your person comes home from the hospital, then you're extra vigilant, right? So it's like sleep, like we need it. And there's like 10 million reasons why as caregivers, we don't get much of it. And when we do, it's not quality sleep, right?
Yeah.
So this building block is missing.
Hey, you brought up something interesting there that triggered something in my mind. We haven't had hospital stays necessarily, although Sarah 2 years ago, I think, was in the hospital for a couple nights. But like she's had procedures where, you know, we have to go in and then they take her back for a couple hours for something like that kind of thing. And for me, those have been moments of feeling rest because there are professionals that are caring for her. And they are qualified and they are, and there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I need to do. And yeah, sometimes just letting other people be there and do their thing. And I don't know, maybe that's different for different people in how they kind of relate to those experiences. But I distinctly remember several of those occasions just feeling like a weight coming off my shoulders.
Oh, interesting.
Because like I didn't need to be the one getting her water.
Yeah.
Or all of the little things. There were other people there for that.
That's really interesting. And I think that's really insightful for you to know about yourself. And I think you're right that it could be for different for different people, but that you feel like you are always carrying I don't want to say weight, but you know what I mean? The load, right, of her care.
Yeah.
And that when you can pass that baton off to somebody else and say like, okay, now you've got her. Great.
Yeah. Right.
She's in good hands. It's not like she's not being taken care of. She's being well taken care of. And I don't have to do it for a minute. And like, oh, you know, and so I wonder, maybe we can talk about, like, what are the ways that you can do that without her having to have a procedure?
Right. For sure. Yeah.
Right. But like, what can that look like? But I think it's important for you to understand that for you, that's a form of rest.
Right. So I'm not going to just book her a bunch of procedures for me to get rest.
But I think and maybe we can come back to that when we get into some strategies. But I think, you know, we haven't talked for a while about the backpack, but we used to talk about the backpack all the time, full of rocks, right? Yeah. And so it's almost like you're handing the backpack over to the professionals. Yeah. And then your shoulders like, right? So what are the ways that you can hand that backpack over? That's really interesting. So I think that, that really reminds me of like this word vigilance. Yeah. Because I think that as caregivers, we are constantly vigilant. And so we talked about that happens in the middle of the night, but like that happens always, right? So if we're planning a thing, it's like, okay, but what about, how is this going to, right? If we're with them in the room and we're sort of always like scanning their like symptoms and like, do they look a little weird? Are they this? Are they this? Should we go home? Should they rest? Should we call? Like, and then even when we're away, like you said that you got to be on a boat and there was no cell service. So like, great. Right. Yeah. But when there is, like, what is that vigilance like to even be away and to think about like, how are things going? Right. And so it's this, like, even when we're not with a person, that our mind is still there, whether we're in the room or not. And that constant vigilance can take a toll. And so there's this thing, I'm sure I've mentioned it here before. It's called allostatic load. Yeah. And I'm actually just going to read the definition. Is the physiological measure of the cumulative burden of stress on the body assessed by markers of physiological dysregulation. That was a lot of big words.
Yeah.
Essentially, it says it is the wear and tear on the body which accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. Right. So it's like, typically not Alice Duckload, fight or flight. Right. It's supposed to work that like, here comes the bear. Ah! I run away. I'm scared of the bear. And then the bear, I realize I'm safe. And then I go into rest and digest. Right. But as caregivers, we are constantly being chased by the bear, or we're constantly watching for the bear. Right.
We're stuck in that.
Is this making sense?
Yeah.
And so it's like, and that's not the way our bodies were made to function.
Yeah.
But yet that's the way we roll. And so there's just this constant vigilance of like, what, like that we are always on alert.
Yeah.
Even in our sleep. And that can have play a toll.
Yeah. I mean, I think like when I was, working full time while Sarah was really sick, I look back on that and I wonder how did we get through that? Like, how was I doing that? And it's, I don't know. We just had to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would be at work and there's very little I can do for Sarah, but it's not like my mind is not back home wondering how she's doing. And if she's going to, if I'm going to get a text that she's not doing well and then I have to go home.
Right.
And just, it's just like you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of.
Yep.
Waiting for you to have to like go into that action mode. And so you just kind of like your body preemptively is just stuck in that state. And that's exhausting.
It's almost like the thing we just talked about with sleep, right?
Right.
That we never get to go into that deep sleep. We're always sort of like ready to be woken up. Right. So it's like that. But in our awake mode that we're just always like ready to just react and just pounce and, like, just like, okay, how do you, like when you said that because let me back up.
Yeah.
So like I had a caregiver once who said to me that when she was on vacation, it was actually the worst because she said that her phone was just ringing the whole time with the caregiver from home who had taken over and all of that stuff. And then when it wasn't, like her mind was there. Right. And so same, like it should have been people like, you got away, you got a break. And she was like, nope, didn't. So how have you allowed yourself to like give yourself this day when you like have no cell service? Like, was that hard at first? Or has it just been like, do you have a system set up at home like that, that like Sarah's mom is there? Like how have you allowed yourself to be like, well, no cell service, I guess. And does your brain like follow suit and is like, well, and does it relax?
Yeah, I think like 5 years ago, it would have been a different story. Okay. It didn't feel, when Sarah was really sick, like it didn't feel like there were opportunities like this for me to step away.
Yeah.
So that is a big piece of it.
Okay.
But I think another piece of it is, you mentioned, someone going on vacation and not being restful. Like the first time probably won't be. Yeah. And I think that there is this, like, all of this stuff we're talking about being in this fight or flight, being in this constant vigilance. Like I think about like the paths, like literal like trails. Sure. That like, if everybody walks the same way, you just get this well-worn path, right? And I think about that in my brain. And so that is a like well-worn path from our lives as caregivers. Which one is a well-worn path? The one that we have to be constantly vigilant. That we have to be always aware of what's going on. Yep. That we are just waiting for that call. Yep. We are just in that mode. And there's another path going to, I am going to get away for a day. And I am going to turn my phone off. And I am going to be present in whatever I am doing. The first time you take that path, like there's brush and stuff you probably have to clear through, right? It's gonna be difficult. And your brain is going to constantly want to turn down the path that is more well-worn. Yes. And that's where I think you have to keep trying.
Yeah.
And you have to build up that muscle in your brain where I went away, I was gone for the day, and everything was okay.
Yeah.
And that's easy to say, but it's really hard to to get to that place, I think. Especially, I imagine that there are caregivers who have had experiences where you do go away for the day and things don't go well.
Right.
And then I can never do that again.
Yep.
And I understand that sentiment as a caregiver, and having been in those places where it feels like every bit of the well-being and health of your person is on you.
Yeah.
Which is an unreasonable load to put on yourself in the first place.
Yeah.
But you have to keep trying. And it doesn't have to be like a week vacation. It doesn't even have to be a full day away.
Right.
It could be, I'm going to go for a walk around the block. Like maybe that's where you're at.
Yeah.
And being away for that long feels like a lot.
Yep.
But maybe you can start there, leave your phone at home, take 15 minutes and walk around the block.
Yep.
And doing that consistently, you're going to start, I think, giving your brain a rest.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. I love because you're right that that's exactly how our brains work. I mean, it's a beautiful analogy, and that's actually what happens with the pathways, right? And so I love that visual. And I think what I want to clarify is you didn't, turn your phone off and leave, and Sarah, and with Sarah, in a dire situation, or with Sarah.
Sure.
Right. So I think that we're not saying turn off your phone and take a walk and just whatever happens in those 15 minutes is fine. Right. And so part of it is okay, is there 15 minutes of, cleanup, but it's also setting up systems of support.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So tell me, you were telling me before about work and how eventually, at first you were just your brain was always at home. And so even though you were away and it was supposed to kind of be a break in a weird way, it was still stressful because you were kind of half at home. Right. But then you could set up some systems. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So kind of and I don't remember at what point we kind of set this up, but I would work, I think Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would go into work in the morning, because that Sarah was usually asleep in the mornings until early afternoon. Then I would come home and work from home for the rest of the day. So I was there for that. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think it was, Sarah's mom would be there. So after, a while of that pathway being worn of someone else is there.
Yeah.
I don't need to be waiting for that call.
Yeah.
Your brain can kind of step back from the constant vigilance for a time.
Yeah.
And so I think that during that period, as weird as it sounds that work was a break,
sure,
it was, I could leave that backpack at home, or maybe leave a number of the rocks at home that are in the backpack.
Well, because it was you were handing it to Sarah's mom.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
And then I could be in a place where it felt like I had more control over my situation with work. It wasn't like I was just subject to the whims of Sarah's illness.
Sure.
Or of just external factors.
Sure.
And I think that was a big factor in getting through that, was having that regular support consistently, to where sticking with that long enough to feel like you can know that I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to pass the baton to someone else and see over time that it can be okay.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder that, when you said over time, because even think you're an expert at carrying this backpack because you've had it on for years.
Yeah.
So you handing some of those rocks to Sarah's mom, she's been around, right? But not in the same way you have. And so we cannot expect her to be as good at it as you are.
Right.
On her first time.
Right.
Because she's new and you have been practicing this for years. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that what might happen is it might not be totally smooth.
Yeah.
And then as caregivers, we're well, that was a disaster. We can never leave again. And then we give up.
Right.
But we're not giving the new, helper caregiver a chance.
Right.
And so to say like, okay, let's keep going and let's like, you're learning and we're all learning. And then like, eventually it will get like, cause I'm sure eventually like on those Tuesdays and Thursdays, her mom had it down and like,
right.
So you could just be like, yeah, she's got it. Partly like when you said in the hospital, like, you're like, these are professionals. And so you like, were like, if anybody knows how to do this, it's them.
Yeah.
And so you felt okay giving it over to them. Right.
Right.
And so I think that we can sometimes think like, it's not worth the time it's going to take to train someone. It's not going to go well. It's, I tried it once. It didn't go well. Right. But to think about how if the first time we did any of this, it didn't go well either.
Right.
But that's because it was like a decade ago and we've been doing it every day. And so us continuing to go on at the pace that we all are is unsustainable. We've said that a lot. Right. And so to think about where are the places that you can pass the baton for a little bit, just to let yourself be, like you said, even for you to be able to be in work mode and just in work mode, not in work mode, but with an ear ready on the phone or one foot out the door, ready to bolt when you need to,
Yeah.
So to think about what that is, I mean, it reminds me back to like the, thinking about like delegation is a form of self-care thing I like to say. And so thinking about like, asking someone to come in to provide some respite. So even if that can happen in a more regular way. And so supporters, I'm talking to you here as well. Like, maybe you don't have the capacity, but if you do, to say, not just like, call me when you need me, but to say, hey, what if every Tuesday from, 6 to 7 p.m. I came to your house and sat with your person.
Right.
And you can use that hour however you want. And so then that caregiver supporter person can get good at like, what does 6 to 7 look like? And da-da-da. And then you can know that that's going to happen. And then you know what I mean? Like, even if you have that hour to like walk or sleep or whatever, you take a shower, whatever you want to do. Right.
Yeah.
But to realize that it's going to be bumpy at first, but to not give up. Right.
Yeah.
And what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so important from a like sustainable perspective to find whatever it is for you that like you can let your shoulders down, you can exhale.
Yeah.
Because I think we're carrying so much tension and so much like in our bodies in this experience.
Yeah.
And that, that may look different for a lot of reasons to different people just because of the intensity of the situation you're in.
Yeah.
The season of caregiving that you're in, your own capacity. You may be too exhausted to get away and do a big day trip kind of thing. And so, yeah, it could be, I'm going to sit on the deck for an hour.
Yeah. Or 10 minutes.
Or 10 minutes. Right.
Like start small, right?
Start small.
Yep.
And work on strengthening that muscle of I cannot be on and things will be okay.
Yep.
And just being present with whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Or not doing.
Yeah.
And just being. I think that it's that repetitive consistency that's really going to pay off in the long term here to help make it a more sustainable experience.
Yeah. And I think thinking about for each of us, like, what is it that we might need to let our shoulders down? Like you said, like when she gets rolled off for a procedure, that's when you relax. And for me, like that is not a relaxing time. So that would not, but like for me, what would be the thing? What would I need? And so is it maybe if I knew that this person who's been around and who I trust and if they were here with him, I would feel like I can go off. You know what I mean? Like what is it that each of us needs to know is in place in order for us to relax for 10 minutes, for an hour, for a day, and to think about that for ourselves so that we can build that up. Right. I was talking to a caregiver yesterday about different ways because of the other thing is like the second we have a minute of free time, we give it to other people.
Yeah.
Right. Our to-do list is so long that we're just like, well, if I have free time, I'm going to go work on my to-do list. And then we're never doing something for ourselves. So she and I came up with a kind of 3 different buckets. One was, what are little things she can embed into the day? Like she was saying that, like even having music playing in the background, during the day. And I don't remember if I told you this, but I just bought a little fountain for my office. It's so lovely because I really want to like live on a lake, but I can't. And so I bought a fountain instead.
It's great. I love that.
It's way cheaper than buying a house on a lake.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so it just feels this like I walk into my home office in the morning, I plug in my phone, it starts gurgling, I turn on I have like music on the Calm app. Turn that on. I have my little Apollo bracelet thing. I put that on. Like I just have little things that are like in the background that just make the moment more relaxing, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about those kind of things, like ambient things that you can have.
Yeah, and then it's like those are, if I could,
sure, please.
It's like those are cues that you're building in
exactly
to let your brain, to let your body know that we can relax for a moment here. Exactly. I like that, having external kind of things that you associate with that.
Yeah. Because it's almost like it gets you there faster.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So it's like the cues, like, do, these things are on. Okay, here we go. You know?
Right.
So we talked about those. We talked about building some of the things into the to-do list, because we were talking about like most of us are so like list and load driven that if there's a thing on the to-do list, like you have to take a walk today.
Right.
Like you have to spend 10 minutes on the deck today. Like maybe we'll do it if it's on our to-do list. Right. And then we also talked about having like back pocket things of like, what if suddenly you do like a meeting gets canceled and you have an hour that's free?
Right.
Like instead of just going to the to-do list, what are these fun things or relaxing things that we could say like, I've got an hour. I'm going to go to this list of things I've already brainstormed. And one of them is like, I really want to go, take the dog to the dog park. I really want to, like, what are the fun things that feel good to you that you're just like waiting for the right moment to be able to do, as little bucket fillers.
That's a really good thing to keep in mind, because, and maybe having, you literally have a list of like, I have an hour. Here's the things that I have already thought about that I can use for that time. But also I think we often as caregivers, we deprioritize ourselves.
Oh, 100%.
Right. And so we have an hour. Our brains do not go to, how can I use this hour for myself?
Totally.
Our brains go to, what can I catch up on?
Yeah.
What am I behind on that needs to get, what needs my attention around the house? What thing can I do to do more research or plan for this future thing coming up? Like we don't default to, here's an hour. How can I take care of myself?
Sure. You know where my brain often goes?
Yeah.
Who are the other people in my life that I have not been able to be caring for lately that I can go? So I'm like, I'm going to go to my aunt's house and spend an hour helping her. I'm going to go I'm going to go take care of the little children in my life. I'm going to, like I'm always like I see a free day and I'm like, now I can help other people, which is beautiful in its own special way. Right. But I need to put Allison Breininger on the list of people who need extra help.
Absolutely.
I think that's something we haven't talked about that I want to make sure we say is that another reason we're exhausted is the emotional aspect.
Oh, for sure.
So you and I have talked a lot about anxiety and how both of us live with that fun thing and how it is exhausting to be anxious.
For sure.
Because you're just buzzing. I'll speak for myself. That's how I feel. Just buzzing, high energy. So this energy is being burned just as you're just existing. And that's like, come on, I'm not even doing anything. But it's so exhausting to be anxious and to carry around grief and to carry around resentment and anger and loneliness. And, all these feelings that we carry around with are taking up a lot of energy. And so one thing to think about is like, can you find a safe space? Right. And like, just to like open the valve just a little, right? To let some of that out. Because otherwise it just builds, right? So even like thinking about like we have our caregiver support groups, right? Or I do one-on-one coaching. But if it's not either of those, like, do you have a person in your life, a therapist or a friend or a family member that you can just like release some of those? Or is it journaling or is it whatever that, because holding all those emotions so tightly also takes up a lot of energy and makes us more tired. Right.
Yeah.
I was just saying this week, somebody was like, I don't have time to go to therapy. And I said, yeah, but if you spend like those 50 minutes one day this week, will that make the other 6.5 days be better? Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like, I don't have time for this thing, but if you do this one thing, how can that impact everything else? Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we think about I mean, there's not a lot of easy fixes, right? There's some little things that we can talk about. So I think like emotionally, to go backwards, emotionally, we just talked about like getting your feelings out in some way or another.
Yep.
We talked about trying to build in some like ambient things or some things that can like signal your body to be like, okay, it's time to relax. Some easy things. Put some things on your to-do list. Have a list ready. So if you have some free time.
Right.
And then also finding some systems of support.
Yeah.
And figure out what that could look like, and just figure out, like, invest the time in training in a new person or whatever that looks like. So knowing it's going to be rocky for a while, but that by training them in, you'll have like a built-in time. They'll get better at it, and therefore you'll be able to release. Other things I haven't mentioned that either we can do as caregivers or that supporters can be doing to help us.
One thing that comes to mind is, as a supporter, if you get a text from a caregiver who's like, hey, I happen to be free tonight. Do you want to go grab dinner or grab a beer or whatever it is? To know that that's probably taking a lot for them to ask that, and to prioritize going and doing that with them. Yeah. Like, yeah, maybe you were going to do some stuff around your house that night, but knowing that, like, that's a big step for them potentially to be reaching out to they have some time to be free and to, be flexible for them. Yeah. I think is one thing you can do. I think, and it's a harder one again, like you were talking, like building those systems of support, is thinking as a supporter, what can you do to build a consistent way for something to be offloaded from a caregiver? And whether that is, that could be where you are going to be there and let them get away. It could also be every Tuesday you're bringing a meal. It could be, you're going to mow their lawn for the summer. But to do something consistently so that the caregiver mentally can go through the stages of being able to like fully offload that and know that that is off their plate, and fully just let that piece go. Because if it's a one-time thing, like, that's great and that's appreciated and that's wonderful for sure, but just knowing that that's always going to be happening is, though, it's the long-term kind of way of looking at it that can make a big difference. Absolutely. I mean, I think about like when I knew that we got the gift of like a shoveling service. Right. So I just knew that like that is not something I am going to have to worry about all winter long. Yep. That's a rock you can take out of your backpack. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think something I want to make sure we mention before we go is about that resting can look different. It's not so much about like actual like lying down resting, right? But that it's all about like kind of what's filling up your bucket. For sure. So if anybody has been like watching me lately, like I've been going to the garden store and raking and like I've been physically doing a lot of things, but it's been like filling my bucket, which means it's restful in that way, right? And so I think that some people are like, well, I don't like to lie down, or I don't like to be still, or I don't like to, like, it's not that. It's like, what are the things that are going to fill up your soul, your body? Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, we don't like to give homework, but I just think like caregivers, a couple things to roll around is that, like, what feeds your soul? Like, what would you do if you had 20 extra minutes? What would it take for you to feel like, oh, like I can hand the baton over? Like, what are those things, to start kind of thinking about? And and then we'll have a support group on this topic. And so we can kind of brainstorm together and talk about that. But it's just, I think, to summarize, like, if you're tired, caregivers, I say as I look at my baggy eyes in the screen here in front of me, like, there's just a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons that we are tired in all the ways, more so than our peers. And so if you are, it makes sense. And you're not doing anything wrong. Yeah. Right. It's not your fault. And it's also not sustainable. And so what are the teeny tiny things that you can start doing to kind of move yourself in the direction of feeling a little more rested? Yeah. Right. And we're not, I don't know, to use an analogy sort of from yesterday, we're looking to start slowly pointing the ship in a different direction. Small movements that will point us to a different destination, I guess. Yeah. Kind of like a more hopefully sustainable course as a caregiver. Yeah. But it's not like we're trying to jump all the way there in one step. It's like, what small steps can we take each day, each week to kind of slowly change the course?
Yeah. Love it. You're all about the analogies today. These are good. They're good. I like them. Yeah. Good. All right. Oh, good talking.
Yes, it's been great.
It has. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad it's sometimes it's helpful to, I think they say like name it to tame it, right? Like, even though it's hard to look at all these reasons we're tired, to be like, oh yeah, there's a reason for it. Okay. Sometimes can tame it a little bit instead of just it feeling big and overwhelming. So hopefully that had that impact for the listeners as well. So
for sure.
Yeah. All right, my friend. Good to talk to you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.